Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's nice to see all of you here on a beautiful, thank you. If it's Tuesday, this must be about Mongolia, right? So thank you all. Thank you all for coming out and for being here as we reconstitute what was a long tradition, an exciting tradition here at Western in times past, and that is celebrating Mongolia Days. And we're very pleased to reconstitute the celebration of Mongolia Days, which began a little bit earlier this evening as we welcomed and celebrated some of our both local and visiting Mongolian partnerships. We've got a number of visiting dignitaries from the Consul General in San Francisco, the Mongolian Consul General in San Francisco, as well as visiting delegation of academics from the Mongolian National University of Education, and local politicians and other leaders in our Sister Cities program. So it's been a lot of fun, and here you are with us, eager to learn more about Mongolia. And I know as I look out into the crowd, I see some wonderful colleagues who I know will be traveling to Mongolia soon, and so it's great that you're all here. So I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, which kicks off our celebration of Mongolia Days this evening, and then tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. in the Old Main Theater, just a little ways away from us. But this evening, it's all about Charles Krusakov, our featured and very much very excited to have him here, and I'll introduce him. Charles earned his PhD in economics from the University of Washington, an MA in China Studies and International Relations from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, and a BA in Economics and Managerial Studies from Rice University. He served as a faculty member at Royal Roads University School of Environment and Sustainability, where he oversaw the Masters in Environment and Management and the Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science. In 2012, he moved to that university's Faculty of Management in the School of Business as lead for international business. He continues to teach in a range of undergraduate and graduate programs across both faculties and has been a visiting professor at Munich University of Applied Science, where RRU offers a dual degree, and at universities in China and Mongolia. From his home in Victoria, British Columbia, Dr. Krusakov has extensive international experience working with organizations such as the World Bank, Soros Foundation, Albright Stonebridge Group, which is a strategic advisory and commercial diplomacy firm, Fortune Magazine, the Office of the United States Trade Representative, and the United States State Department. Among his other international leadership activities, he serves as the executive director of the American Center for Mongolian Studies in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, an organization he founded in 2012 and one with which Western has long-standing ties. His research includes publications on natural resource management in Mongolia and land tenure arrangements in China. He's also interested in sustainability decision-making by homeowners and companies, particularly the barriers and benefits of home energy efficiency improvements, with a focus on innovative finance and valuation techniques. This evening, his topic will be natural resource development in Mongolia, the impacts on culture, environment, and government. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Charles Krusakov back to Western.
Have to be a little bit careful. We were just at a dinner with the president of Western, who treated us with his Mongolian vodka that he brought back. So we have to watch out for the edge of the stage here. But so it is very good to be back. I've been at Mongolia Days a number of times in the past. I believe Mongolia Days got skipped for a few years, but now they're back, and I think they're bigger and better than ever. And it's great to hear that there's a number of faculty and staff and students who are going over to Mongolia this summer. And we're sure that that's just the first wave of many more people who will go over. You may be aware that Bellingham has very long ties with Mongolia through Bola and others, Susan Bradbury and others in the community who helped establish the sister city between Bellingham and Tsetserlig. And there have been numerous programs that I've come to in Bellingham, excellent programs on poetry and music and different activities here. So it is really great to be back, and it's especially great to be back to celebrate, in some ways, a really special gift that Western Washington has gotten from your very own Professor Emeritus Henry Swartz, who has helped to, for many years, support the Mongolian Studies programs. We always say there are two Mongolian Studies programs really in the United States. One's at Indiana. We haven't really heard too much about that, but the other is in Bellingham here at Western Washington University. And Western Washington has the larger library collection on Mongolia, and I believe one of the largest library collections in the world actually on Mongolia. And people come from all over the world to Western to utilize that collection. And much of it is thanks to the generosity of Henry. And then I'm being filmed because Henry's co-conspirator, James Street, wasn't able to be here today, but he also is supporting this new initiatives in Mongolian studies, and I think really will be establishing Mongolian studies here. So I want to say hello and thank you for your support of Mongolian studies. I'm going to talk, my core field is economics, but you probably heard from the wide range of things that I do. I'm really a generalist. I'm a person who is interested in a lot of different topics. At the University of Washington, where I did my PhD, I worked on natural resource economics, which really got me into the environment. And so I started working in Mongolia, I'll show you, in the early 1990s. And I was searching for a topic, and Mongolia has the largest common property grassland in the world. And still intact. There are almost no fences in Mongolia. Wide open grasslands like you see here. This is the central steppe in the central part of the country. Just a beautiful, beautiful landscape and a really unique way of life that really doesn't exist in many other parts of the world. And we were reminded coming, there was a delegation from the Mongolian National University of Education at the dinner that we were at, and various other Mongolian friends, including our friends here who will be performing tomorrow night, which you shouldn't miss that. And my wife and I were reminded that what we really love, not just the landscapes of Mongolia, but the people of Mongolia. And that's what keeps bringing us back. And I think that any of you who are able to visit or to get to know Mongolian people here in the United States or in other places, you'll really find a special tie with Mongolia. So I'm just going to cover really a broad area. We have some really great experts on Mongolia in the room here, and we have some people who know very little about Mongolia, so I have a tough audience, but I'm going to try to give you an overview really of some of the current issues in Mongolia. I'm going to start somewhat with the economic issues, because of course as an economist we believe that everything relates to the economy in one way or another. So I'm going to give you the overview of where Mongolia is in economic terms, and then talk about how some of those economic changes that have been happening in Mongolia, mostly led by natural resource development, some large mine development in Mongolia, are affecting topics such as the environment, which is a very important topic that I've worked with, cultural issues, which I work a lot with through the American Center for Mongolian Studies, and the political system, which is a very important tie in that Mongolia being the only democracy, active democracy in the region in which it's located. So I have a broad set of topics. I hope I tried to include as many pictures, most of them my own pictures of different travels I've had in Mongolia, to give you also a good feel for Mongolia for those of you who haven't been or haven't been in a long time. One shout, I work at Royal Roads University, which is in Victoria, BC. This is the mutant castle from the X-Men movies, so come and visit us in Victoria as well. Now, you mentioned that I founded the American Center for Mongolian Studies. That was in 2002, and in 2004 we opened our office in Ulaanbaatar. Our current director, Mark Tasse, was just here on campus a few weeks ago, and was able to meet with people. And he's on the ground in Mongolia. And those of you who are going over, you'll understand how important our center is in terms of it's really the home away from home for the international academics who are doing projects in Mongolia. And we give out fellowships. We have a variety of different programs. And I was saying, sadly, we actually have never had an applicant even for one of our fellowships from Western Washington University. And we give out money. We want you to go to Mongolia. So next year, you've missed the deadline for this year, but next year, we are giving out money for students, for faculty, to go to Mongolia to carry out research projects. So please, our website, I'll show you at the end, mongoliacenter.org. Explore our different fellowship opportunities and learn more about the ACMS. We have language programs in Ulaanbaatar and a whole variety of different events. And your team going over will come back and report on the role of the ACMS in supporting international scholars and Mongolian scholars in Ulaanbaatar and in Mongolia. So back to the future. Now you might recognize some of these people. So I was here in the libraries May 2006. In 2005, the ACMS established its first US office here at Western Washington University. That's when I moved up to Victoria, and I needed to have a US home, and it just was such a great fit that we were able to have the center here and build off of the resources here. And Kathleen Tomlanovic, Ed Veda, and all our other friends who were really supportive of bringing the center here and worked with us quite closely. And it was great to dig up these pictures of everyone who was involved in that. I always say it's kind of funny, we started to establish the center in early 2005, and it took until May 2006 for the lawyers at Western Washington to actually get us a contract together. It was much more complicated than we thought, but we were here for a number of years, and then because of some US government funding issues, we received most of our funding from the US government. They wanted us to be located at a big research institution that also was receiving US funding for East Asian studies. So we relocated to the University of Wisconsin, and then subsequently to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, where we're located now. So it's great to be back. The center's office is not here, but we are going to build a very cooperative partnership, and Western Washington has been a founding member and long-standing member of our organization. Now, going way back, I thought I would include some pictures of the early days, at least the early days for me, and many Mongolians like to see these pictures as well. So this was in 1992. This is the American Embassy. So how did I work for so many organizations? I was an intern. I was a university student for 12 years and an intern in probably 10 organizations, including the US State Department. And I was an intern just after they opened the US Embassy in Ulaanbaatar. And so at that time, I lived in the embassy. If you try to go to the embassy now, you will see the Fortress America, right? You can't get inside the embassy very easily. But I lived there. The ambassador lived there. Joe Lake was the first US resident ambassador. And here's all the Americans in Ulaanbaatar in 1992. One, you can't get in the embassy, and now they have the same party, and they have 500-600 people show up. There's so many more foreigners and so many people there, but it was a very different time when I was first there. And Tina, actually, I hear lives in, she's immigrated now to Seattle. And so these were the staff of the American Embassy at the time when I came over. Here's pictures from Ulaanbaatar in 1992. If you've been back, the road to Zysen, I was just telling Henry, this was the tallest building in town. There's big towers you'll see now towering over that. So there's a monument up on the hill outside of Ulaanbaatar looking down, a Soviet war memorial looking down over the city. And the growth in Ulaanbaatar and the number of towers and apartment complexes, it's changed a lot even since these pictures were taken. And the city has just grown up so much. So I'm going to be talking about economic development and growth. And when you hear about mines and taking things and selling them, this is what it starts to look like, right? Economic growth really starts to have physical appearances and changes within the society and culture. And it's been fascinating to me to watch this progression in Mongolia. And I guess I'm getting old enough now that I've seen this progression happen where you see the development occurring. And I'll show a couple more pictures here. And you can see that So in 1990, Mongolia shifted from the communist system to a capitalist system and open democracy. I was here throughout the early 1990s in Mongolia, and you can see there was a big economic downturn after the fall of communism. And then this is the income per capita. Started to go up. There was a little dip due to the recession in 2008, 2009, and now it's taken off again. Mongolia is no longer a low-income country. It's now a middle-income country, and that's because of the natural resources that are being developed in Mongolia. Here's the view of the central square. When I first came, people were riding their horses through. There were cattle in Sukhbadar Square here, and now it's ringed by all these big office buildings, and the whole complexion of the city has changed so much. Income per capita, as they say, Mongolia is a middle-income country now, has a purchasing power parity, meaning what you can buy with the money, because many of the prices you'll find in Mongolia are lower for different items, of about $12,000 per year, which is just below China. Not nearly as high as South Korea. Does anyone know what the PPP income in the US? It's around $50,000 a year, right? So again, a bit higher, but much higher. We're hearing about Nepal right now. Why will Nepal have such a difficult time recovering from the earthquake? In part because they have such low income. Their economy doesn't generate a lot of wealth. I heard Nepal has one of the highest percentages of people, young workers leaving the country. Very difficult for a country like that to recover. Mongolia has really grown tremendously, just the income doubling in the course of less than 10 years, reaching now, as I say, by some measures, $12,000 per year. And we feel that with my organization, salaries have gone way up. It's much more difficult to hire people now. There's just a lot more activity going on in the country. But Mongolia's economy is very dependent on natural resources. You can see minerals sector alone is 81% of Mongolia's exports. 73% of the foreign investment coming in the country comes due to mining. It's only about 20% of the GDP, but that's a large share for any country because most of your GDP is from sales of other products and things, but very important for the government budget. So you see the Mongolian economy depends very much, and it swings widely like resource economies when the prices of the resources are up or down. So in 2009, 2010, the price of resources plunged in the recession, and Mongolia's economy actually contracted and went into a recession. In Canada, we would say similar to Alberta, or in the United States, similar to any state that's very reliant on oil or other natural resources. Alaska is suffering with the fall in the oil price. But then it peaked. It went straight from the bottom up to a growth of almost 17%. Mongolia was featured in The Economist magazine because it was the fastest growing economy in the world. 18% growth in 1 year is just an incredible level of economic growth. It was too fast. Even most Mongols agree it was just too fast and too much happening. Mineral prices have fallen. The Mongolian government made several policy steps that I'll talk a little bit more about, but you can ask more questions that really hurt their chances for foreign investment. And the Mongolian economy has been slowing down every year since it really reached that peak. Whereas at one time they were projecting that Mongolia was going to grow by 10 to 15% every year because of the natural resource development. The major resource development projects are all on hold right now. They're being negotiated, but they have not moved forward. And the economy itself is really feeling a slowdown. And really the growth that's happening here mainly came from money that the Mongolian government borrowed and then has been spending in various ways on domestic infrastructure projects. And I'll show that in a second, the effects of that. One thing to remember in Mongolia, so the economy is growing and there's a lot of new development, but Mongolia is essentially almost completely dependent in many ways on China and Russia. It's dependent economically because essentially all Mongolian exports go to China. Russia has no need for Mongolia's minerals. It's too expensive to ship minerals from Mongolia through Russia or China to the seacoast. So the only buyer for all of Mongolia's minerals is China. And this really hurts Mongolia. So Mongolia is selling coal that Australia can sell for $110 a ton, because they can put it on ships and send it anywhere in the world. Mongolia has to sell it to China for $50 a ton because they have no choice of where else to sell their coal. Now, they still have an advantage because their coal is located very close to China, so they can still make some money, but it's very marginal production. And the Mongolians are very, very aware of their dependence on China and would love to change it. But as an economist, I look and say, you're just physically unable to get your exports, bulk exports like coal, to the sea at a reasonable price to sell to anyone else. So it's a real challenge Mongolia faces. The other challenge Mongolia faces, Mongolia used to trade almost exclusively with Russia, both imports and exports. But since 1990, their share of trade with Russia fell off. They export almost nothing to Russia now, but they're still very dependent on Russia for their imports of primarily mineral products, meaning oil. So all their refined oil products like gasoline, jet fuel, et cetera, would be coming in from Russia. And a big share of their electricity comes from Russia. So this gives Russia a lever of power over Mongolia, because if they were to cut off, which they have on brief occasions in the past, if they decided not to deliver gasoline to Mongolia, all the cars in Mongolia within a few weeks would run out of gas. The whole country, all the mining operations, the electricity would go down, and Mongolia is very dependent on Russia. Now, this plays into Mongolia's strategy to try to develop, but they're very torn because they know the more they develop their natural resources and the only customer is China, the more they get tied to China. But they're very, very torn because they don't have any other way or strategy forward. They've tried to find ways to export to other markets, but it's basically not going to work. And this is part of what's been stalling a lot of development in Mongolia, is trying to think of some other model, but there really is no other model that's effective at this point. Okay, Mongolia is in a very challenging economic position. Mongolia has been running huge current account deficits. Now, this means that basically Mongolia is importing far more than they're exporting. Now, we expect a developing country to run a current account deficit often, just like students who are here at Western Washington borrow a lot of money while they're in school with the expectation that later, when they get out, they'll have new skills and they'll be able to earn the money back, to pay the money back. So Mongolia is like, a teenager or a college student that's borrowing a lot of money, should be developing its productive capacity by building its mines, by building its infrastructure, and getting ready so that in a few years, as production really takes off, that they will be able to pay back the money that they've borrowed. The challenge for Mongolia, as I mentioned, is that these two big projects that I'll say in a minute, the Oyu Tolgoi copper project and the Tavan Tolgoi coal project, which are two of the world's largest mining projects, are both stalled. They're both on hold. And so Mongolia has to start paying back a lot of the money that it borrowed within the next 2 years. And the government, the economy is slowing down. It's been fueled by this money that Mongolia borrowed, and they've been spending on roads, streets in Ulaanbaatar and apartment buildings and things, but they haven't really been able to develop their mines. Even if they started developing those mines today, it will take several years before they come into full production. They're way behind on developing a new power plants and other infrastructure. And so they're caught in a bit of a trap right now that they're not going to have the money to pay it back. And so who's the lender that has stepped forward basically to offer to help Mongolia? Well, their friendly neighbor, China, who says, well, we will help you out as long as you agree to some concessional deals about selling us minerals at low prices and other agreements. And Mongolia realizes it's a trap, but they're, as they say, they haven't been able to get themselves a bit out of this trap. And this is an active thing. There are a lot of investors in the world. I do some consulting, and I'm getting calls from Hong Kong, from Singapore, from Goldman Sachs, saying, when are they going to sign these agreements on these mines? Because that's the signal that Mongolia will be moving forward. But they haven't been able to do that. And you can see, this is a chart of foreign investment in Mongolia. Since 2012, when foreign investment was fairly high, it's been steadily falling. And so people are not investing in Mongolia because they're waiting to see if these mines will go ahead. They're waiting to see what's going to happen in the economy. And we're in a bit of a waiting game to see how this is going to break free. And as I say, Mongolia is in a bit of a trap because it takes several years to develop a power plant or a mine, and they're going to have a challenge. So if you look at stock price, I just put this up. This is the stock price actually of a firm called Mongolian Growth Group. You can buy it on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Its trading symbol is YAK. Here's the last year for this stock. You know, what's been happening? If you look at the stocks of Mongolian companies or companies associated with Mongolia, they all look like this. Now, there's been a brief period where everyone keeps hearing rumors that these deals are going to be signed, and people keep waiting to bid up the price. You know, is it at its low point? Can I buy now? I don't know. I have a lot of friends who are thinking about buying this company. This company owns a number of shopping malls and real estate in Ulaanbaatar. If Mongolia grows again at 10 or 15% a year, it will be worth a lot of money. If Mongolia banks default and the whole economy collapses like Greece, they're going to be in a very big problem. So it'll be interesting to see. But we say for the long run, the grass will get greener. This is a good sign because Mongolia has trillions of dollars of natural wealth in the ground. It has the world's largest customer for that next door. At some point, they will dig up what they have in the ground and they will sell it to China, and they will be able to finance for the 3 million people of Mongolia a very good living. It will develop, one hopes, more like Australia than like some other states, and that's the resource curse versus the development. But Mongolia is at a very critical juncture in their economy right now. So those big projects that I mentioned, one is the Oyu Tolgoi, the OT, the copper project. Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest mining companies, has put several $billion already into this project. Most of the foreign investment you saw was associated with the development and build out of this project. It's a city unto itself down in the Gobi Desert. It's located here, very close to the Chinese border, in the middle of the desert here, and relatively close to this Tavan Tolgoi, which is the largest coking coal deposit in the world. These are huge, huge multi-billion-dollar projects. They have enough copper and gold in this for 60 or 100 years of production. But it's held up right now. The Mongolian government is a one-third owner of the project and has to negotiate with Rio Tinto, the global mining company that owns the other two-thirds, to move the project forward. And they've not reached an agreement on that, in part because the Mongolian government as an owner has to help invest the money to further develop the mine, and they don't have the money right now. So they have to reach an agreement of how they will pay for that. Now, this has been Mongolia's growth. As I say, the optimistic side is there's been tremendous growth. You can see it, you can feel it. Some of it's bad. You go to Ulaanbaatar, the traffic is crazy. When I first went to Mongolia, of course, no one had private cars. Streets were wide open. Now the traffic jams. Air pollution is terrible. A lot of things are happening there. On the plus side, I can see among my Mongolian friends that many people have gotten wealthy by anyone's standards or really increased their own standard of living even for the average families. And so you can feel that economic lift. But it's had a big impact on the environment as it's unfolded, on culture and democracy and politics. So I'm going to go through some of these different areas now. So in terms of the environment, now if you think about Asian countries, Mongolia is the least densely populated country in the world, yet next to China with 1.3 billion people, right, and many other countries that have tremendous impacts. You can't even imagine, probably, none of us can imagine what the actual natural environment of China looked like before there were hundreds of millions of people living there. In Mongolia, there are some challenges with wildlife, with the nature areas, but for the most part, Mongolia remains an intact landscape, a wide open area with few fences. As soon as you start building fences, when you build railway lines, when you build roads, all of that infrastructure brings people into remote areas. It allows poaching, It blocks the migration of animals. There's some concerns about this. There have been some problems. Poaching has been a problem, like with the Mongolian gazelle. But for the most part, many of the last remaining Asian populations of many animals, like snow leopards, this gazelle, the wild horses, the wild camels, most of the major populations in Asia are in Mongolia because of its relatively pristine nature. So my friends in the wildlife area say, there are challenges, but compared to areas where they're deforesting everything and there's virtually no hope that the wildlife can come back, Mongolia still has a lot of hope. A lot of the country is set aside in parks, and so they need to be careful with development, but this is something that is probably a real story that can be told potentially with very positive results. People like to point the finger, and I have a next slide about people like to point the finger at these big international mining companies like Rio Tinto or other companies and the impacts that their projects have on the environment, and that's true. In Mongolia, though, one of the greatest impacts is not from the international companies, but from local people. And they're called ninja miners. Anyone know why they're called ninja miners? They would carry their pans on their back, and this is American West, right? Canadian West gold panning that's going on in mass scale. There are over 100,000, there's only 3 million people in Mongolia, and over 100,000 people in Mongolia are spending their summers gold panning and digging up any place they hear there could be gold. They're using mercury in open pans to get the gold flakes, and then they take the pans of mercury and either dump the mercury or they evaporate it in their tents so they can collect the gold. Now, there's been a lot of challenge. I had several students who worked on different mercury projects in Mongolia. A challenge there is that mercury is illegal. You can't use mercury. So how can the government have a program to deal with a substance that's illegal? They've had a real challenge. We have the same with our drug issues and other things. But that's part of the challenge is how do you deal with something that's supposed to be illegal, but it's in widespread use. And so there's tremendous water pollution problems occurring. Mongolians rely on the streams for their animals, and when the water gets polluted or used for placer mining, they're pulling water out with pumps, and then the stream dries up, and the families have to move away with their herds. This is a huge problem, and there's a lot of different programs trying to work with it, but it's something that is really, if you're interested in this type of area, looking at ninja mining, and artisanal gold mining in Mongolia is one of the top countries in the world trying to address this. There are several other countries that also have similar issues, but Mongolia, even for its small population size, has a huge number of people working in this area. Now, I mentioned large thirsty mines in the Gobi. So if you imagine, the Rio Tinto mine is this massive mine that's out in the middle of the desert. The mine itself needs huge amounts of water. The Tavan Tolgoi coal mine is going to require huge amounts of water to wash the coal and prepare it in the processing. They're building cities where they've never had cities before. Hanbogd is the town that's closest to these mines, has grown from less than 1,000 people to 5,000 today and is projected to go to 25,000. Where are they going to get the water? So they're pulling up water from the aquifers, what they call water mining, but water use and reuse is a very important issue. And I mentioned, and this is something that I'm going to talk tomorrow with the Huxley School about different opportunities we've been sending from my university. These are 5 recent graduates from my university who are going to work with Mongolian companies who supply the mine, trying to help local companies develop their capacity to become suppliers. They also say, there's a real interest that they have in people coming to work on different environment internships in Mongolia in projects associated with the mine and community engagement and development. So those are opportunities. Now moving on from the environment to sort of cultural and social issues, Mongolia, of course, is going through a transition, and you see tremendous in-migration from the countryside. Any Mongolian can put up a tent and put up a fence on the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar and have a place to live. You're seeing overgrazing desertification of areas in the grasslands, the cutting of Mongolia's small wood supplies. So these issues are all, cultural and environmental issues that are affecting the country. In the culture field, my center, the American Center for Mongolian Studies, has been working closely. Our president's from the Smithsonian Institution, and we've been working on a lot of projects to basically document and preserve Mongolia's cultural heritage. Because as they say, more and more people, they're building roads into remote areas. Those gold miners might come into an area, and they might see a statue like this and realize they could take it and sell it to a collector or to a hotel or to someone, right, who might be interested. And by removing this from its original site, they destroy much of the evidence associated with the objects. There's rock art across Mongolia. So there's a big effort to try to document these field sites, to come up with databases and catalogs of material that's in museums or in these different field sites. So we have right now a Cultural Heritage Fellowship program that's supporting this, and several other projects together with our different partners in this area. So if anyone's interested in cultural heritage, and this is tangible cultural heritage, we'd be interested in talking. There's also intangible cultural heritage, meaning the songs, the legends, the music, poetry. I remember coming here to Simon Wickham Smith, reading the Mongolian poets here, very beautiful Mongolian poetry tradition. This area is interesting. It's important to both record what's been going on in the past, but I also find it a very living area. If you go to Mongolia, the music scene and the young people and the taking traditional music and taking it into things like folk rock is a really, really interesting and live thing. And there's a movie called Mongolian Bling and a number of other movies that are on the internet and other places that you can see about Mongolian bands and Mongolian music where they take traditional music and bring it into a modern era. One of the enduring things that you'll see when you go to Mongolia and you're there is just that this nomadic, semi-nomadic, pastoral culture still exists. People live in a very traditional way, even if they're riding motorcycles, sometimes now instead of horses. But people, this was our friend, took us to visit his herd of 1,200 horses that he has. He didn't know where they were because they could be roaming anywhere across a huge swath of central Mongolia. So it took us a whole day to drive around and find where his horses were. With cell phones, we could probably find it faster now, but you go in to visit people's tents, you're having a milk tea, the dried milk curds, adel. So this is living culture, and just like you talk to your grandparents, your great-grandparents, you see what, in a way, we've lost in our culture just over time. This is all still present in Mongolia, but fast changing. Many people moving to the city. This sort of everyday culture is something that's very important to document and try to support and preserve. Mongolia as a democracy. So this was the election. This is Oyun, who's still a politician in Mongolia. This was an election site in Mongolia. So I say Mongolia is a democracy, it's a thriving democracy. And this is something I explain to people is Mongolia is a very active democratic system in which the political parties are not strong. And essentially every parliament member, there's 76 of them, is their own political party. It makes it very difficult to understand how to reach coalitions, how to reach deals, etc. So it is a democracy, but in many ways natural resources has undermined the foundations of Mongolian democracy or changed it. Part of that is because the Mongolian government has undertaken a program, and this was something I presented at a conference recently, so I'm giving you just a summary here, but Mongolia, after the breakup of communism, privatized most state-owned assets. But starting in 2005, as mining started to take off, the government changed its plans and decided to really become an owner of many mineral resources. So they became a 1/3 owner in the Oyu Tolgoi project, 100% owner of the Tavantol coking coal mine, and many other mines in Mongolia, where the Mongolian government is the owner of the mine. So the Mongolian government is now the largest owner of mineral resources by far in the country. So when you have the government actually owning the mines, it creates a lot of different problems. Now, what supports government ownership? We have in the United States and In Canada, primarily private ownership of mines. We wouldn't think about the state of Washington or the federal government owning and operating a mine. They regulate those mines. Well, part of it was that the Mongolian people, the public, overwhelmingly supports state ownership. Part of that's the socialist legacy. Under the communist system, the state always owned infrastructure projects like that. Part of it, in talking with Mongolian friends, is that people say, how can a foreign company actually own the soil of Mongolia? This is owned by the Mongolian people. How can you tell me that Rio Tinto owns our soil and can dig it up and sell it? Like, it is ours. And so the way that that gets conceptualized and put forward is through state ownership of those actual natural resources. And part of the argument that the government uses is to say, well, if we own these resources, then we can provide benefits to everyone in the country because we own them, and when we produce them, then taxpayers will benefit, every citizen will benefit. And they keep having announcements that they're going to give cash handouts to every Mongolian citizen based upon the windfall of the mining riches that have occurred. What's really happened? Well, I say these projects are stalled, in part because the Mongolian government is the owner of the projects, and the Mongolian government has been unable to take politics out of the management of these mines. And it's a long story to tell the many tales of Tavan Tolgoi, for example, but basically the government strips all the assets out of them, leaving the company with no money to actually develop and operate the mine. Because the election's coming, we need some money, so let's take it out of the mine and give it out to our voters so that we can get elected. And then the company's bankrupt and can't actually produce the coal they have to produce to continue doing. So there's tremendous corruption. Parliament has become, the richest people of Mongolia are in parliament because they see that in order to get access to these mineral resources, we have to become a parliament member. The mining development has been very inefficient. And the Mongolian government has not been able to find a way to actually efficiently operate these mines. People have pointed out that now the state is actually competing against the private mines that exist and giving preferential treatment, of course, to their own state-owned mines. The state is not following its own environmental laws and regulations. And then, this is a little more esoteric economic point, but the idea is that if you're working for a company, the last place that you want to save your retirement savings is in the stock of the company that you work for. Because that company is paying your salary, and as everyone who worked for Enron discovered a number of years ago, if they had saved their retirement savings in Enron stock, the company goes out of business, you lose your job, but now you've also lost your entire retirement package. So Mongolian government is essentially investing all of its funds in its own mines. It relies on the mines for its own tax money, and it's extremely risky for a downturn in mineral prices for the Mongolian government if this, in any kind of risk situation. So people would give them advice to invest in shopping malls in the United States. Don't invest in mines in anywhere in the world because you need to disassociate your investments from your main pool, your own revenue source. So now, what's going on? 2015, people ask me, what's new and what's happening? Well, they've heard that, as I say, there was a little bounce because they heard that these deals were about to be done. The Mongolian prime minister announced that the deals were about to be done. The officials of the companies that they were going to sign the deals with flew to Ulaanbaatar to sign the deals. And then the head of parliament announced, no, we need to review the deals. And they disappeared into parliament, and we have not heard whether they're going to approve, whether they're going to consider the deals. There's political infighting between the prime minister and the other members of parliament. There are concerns about Chinese investment. There are concerns about foreign investment. There's an election coming up next year. People are starting to position for the election. So we don't know whether they will be able to reach an agreement and they will sign the deals. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen next week. It could not happen for 2 years. So we don't know where we're at in this. the prime minister, in fact, held a text referendum. Now, this is not a scientific voting sample, but he asked people to text in, would you rather us continue to negotiate with foreigners for these mines, or would you rather austerity and an austerity budget because we don't have any money? 44% of people texted back that they supported austerity. Now he said, oh, well, I got a majority support for continuing the, and I said 44% of people saying that they want austerity is a really high number for something like that. So these deals are stalled, and what really needs to happen is they have to find a way. The Mongolian public really supports state ownership, and they're not ready to give up that state ownership, and they have to find a way to move these projects forward and wean the government out of. And there are different ways. They could have different sorts of joint ventures or public-private partnerships, or spin off the shares from the state-owned firms, or there are different ways. They're considering different projects, but any of those will take time, and it's really stalled the whole process in Mongolia. So that's what people are watching right now is, will they approve the deals that are on the table, and how are they going to move forward on ownership of these resources in the future? So that's the main part of my talk. And then I wanted to speak a little bit with the students to say, I was there. In 1988, I graduated from university, and I was trying to decide. I put on my suit like this, and I went and I interviewed. At that time, it was Anderson Consulting, I remember, Arthur Anderson. And I went and I interviewed at Arthur Anderson and other firms, and I was a business major, an economics and business major, and I was going to go to work for one of these firms, and I thought, I don't know. I just had this lingering doubt. And then one of my professors said, now is your chance. Now is your time to go abroad. You don't have a job, you don't have a family. It's going to get much harder for you to do it later. Go now. So I convinced a friend of mine from Midland, Texas, where I grew up, that we would go. And we had been to we had been to Europe on study abroad during school, and we decided to go to Asia. And we went all over Asia for a year and a half. I crossed Mongolia on the Trans-Mongolian train from Beijing to Moscow in 1989, and had just an amazing experience. I had at this point not taken a single class in Asian studies at all. I'd taken some international stuff, but I knew nothing about Asia. I certainly knew nothing about Mongolia. Crossing through it in the train, I thought, it looks just like West Texas where I grew up. I never want to come back here. And I stand before you now. I just gave you a whole talk about Mongolia. I still have never taken a class on Mongolia. I've never studied Mongolia. I'm not a Mongolia studies expert like some of the experts we have here. But I got really interested, and I had a lot of Mongolian friends, and I had awesome experiences being in Mongolia, working for different organizations, and it just really interested me. And that's the spark. That's what takes you forward. And so that's why I really want people to go to Mongolia and see it. This Mongolian proverb about it's better to see something one time than to hear about it and to keep listening to lectures and people saying, oh, you really have to go to Mongolia. So I'm saying you have to find a way to get over there, or any country. It's not just Mongolia. I could have gone to Albania, and I could be standing here talking to you about Albania, but I went to Mongolia. I love Mongolia and many things about it, and I think that Western has the chance. You're just on the verge of really getting the ball rolling in terms of sending students, faculty, and getting really programs. And getting people on the ground is what will make it all happen. And I'll leave with, this was my mongoliacenter.org, which is my organization. I founded this organization for that single purpose, to get people in Mongolia, to foster research, to foster chances for people to go abroad. I don't really need to spend my weekends writing grants and trying to get projects so that people can go on fellowship. I don't get to go on the fellowship. When I go to Mongolia now, I have to go to meetings all day in Ulaanbaatar. It's not very interesting. I'd rather be in the countryside. But I think the American Center for Mongolian Studies, the whole purpose of the organization is to help people get over there, make the logistical problems of getting there, finding an apartment, finding partners in Mongolia, helping the Mongolians partner and find ways to come abroad to learn and build partnerships. That whole piece is what our organization is about, and really my main message from the talk. So thank you very much.